Hey, welcome to another episode of DOCasts. In this episode, we're going to cover SSH keys. Now, in previous episodes, I talked about SSH keys and the ability to set an SSH configuration file for a little bit more advanced configuration when you're connecting to multiple servers, or whether it be for work, for play, your own projects, or connecting to GitHub, Bitbucket. And you can set SSH keys for everything, and you can customize them for all of those different servers that you're connecting to. Now, you'll see that SSH keys are quite common within the development world. We have SSH keys for DigitalOcean, we have SSH keys for GitHub if you use GitHub, and we have SSH keys for Bitbucket. As your development career progresses, of course, you'll see more and more SSH keys where you can add them directly to your VPSs or your servers or whatnot. And so with that said, we'll jump into our terminal application or our command line application, and we'll get started with setting up your SSH keys. Now, if you've set up an SSH key before, you'll know that the SSH key gen is the command that you would use to set up your SSH key. So we'll quickly run the man pages on that just to see what that's like. Now you'll see that SSH keygen is the authentication key generation, management, and conversion. And you can go ahead, and if you would like to read through the information within this man page here, I'm just going to go ahead and I'll quit out of this. Again, that's completely up to you, but we'll get started by setting up a keygen. So we'll type in SSH keygen, and then we'll go ahead and we'll pass the attribute T RSA for the type of generation that we're going to be using. Then we're going to type in -C with, I like to use my email address. So john@DOCasts.com would be my email address. And then we would go ahead and click on enter. But before I continue, what do all these commands mean? Well, if we break this down, we have the SSH keygen that we just went over, and that's basically the generation engine, and it's going to use -T to specify the type of crypto system that we're using. So this is a public type crypto system, RSA, that is commonly used, and what this does is it creates a public and a private or secret key. The public key is encrypted, and the decryption key, which is kept on your computer, is totally different, and it decrypts that encryption key. And it basically tells the server that your computer is exactly who it says it is. And then we have the comment, which is my email address. So -C is a comment for the email address that this key is associated with. All right, so now if we go ahead and click on enter, it's going to say generating public/private RSA key pair. Now that's what we talked about here. It creates that public key, which is what you're going to copy over to the server or the third-party server. Then it's going to create that private decryption key that stays on your computer. So that key pair works together for authentication. And in this next step, we can go ahead and we can either click on enter so that it creates the ID_RSA, which is the default file for an RSA crypto system generation. But what I like to do, especially if we're going to be creating different keys for different servers, is I like to name them. So let's go ahead and name this key sample. And it's going to go ahead and it's going to put this into our .ssh directory, and it's going to name it sample. So I'll click on enter. Then we'll have the option to enter in a passphrase. Now, I always recommend entering in a passphrase. This adds an extra layer of security. So if somehow someone malicious gets a hold of your key by accessing your computer somehow, copying that over to their computer, they potentially have the ability to access that server that you authenticate with using that key. And without a passphrase, they can connect straight to that server without a problem. Now, if you add a passphrase in, it makes it that much more difficult for the malicious user to get onto that server should they get a hold of your key file. I'll add in a simple password here, and then I'll click on enter. I'll confirm that password, and then it'll go ahead and it'll save that to my .ssh directory. You'll see that a couple things happened here. my identification has been saved in sample, which is our file that we specified. Our public key has been saved in sample.pub, and then our key fingerprint has also been created with the comment of my email address. Now, this is the random art image of what the encryption kind of looks like. What we can do now is we can move into our .ssh directory. So now we can take a look at our public key file here. So if I go ahead and I use lesssample.pub, it should allow us to look at what's in that public key. And this is the encryption key that's going to be placed on top of your server. So you can see we have the key here with the comment that was made. And I'll go ahead and I'll quit out of that. That's the same thing as doing cat.sample.pub, just so you can take a look at that within your command line utility. But what we want to do is we want to copy it to our keyboard. So I'm going to put pb copy, and that is going to copy to our clipboard from our SSH directory from that sample.pub file. Now if I paste that into my terminal, that's the same thing that we saw there earlier. Now we're going to take this and we're going to move into Bitbucket, and we're going to add a key here. And this key will be our sample key, and we're just going to paste that in, and you'll see that we have that SSH RSA, which is the type of encryption that we use, or the type of crypto system that we used. All right, then we're going to add the key, and that's going to save to our SSH keys area. Now if we move back into iTerm and go to our blog, we'll reference those Git repos again, the Git remote repos here. And we'll see that we have the origin and the origin 2 that we created that actually works. So the origin 2 is referencing our SSH config file for the bitbucket underscore DOCasts hosts, right? And that's allowing us to go ahead and push to that repo. So what we need to do is we need to reference and create a reference in our SSH config file for this new SSH key. So what we can do is we can take a look at what's currently there. I went ahead and added in some of the configuration files that we need to get this set up, but let's go ahead and go through that real quick. At the top of my SSH config file, I now have host, hostname, identity file, identities only, and user. On the right hand side of that, I have the values for each. So for host, we're going to be calling the get blog. Then hostname, we're going to call bitbucket.org, which is what we took away originally when typing in that get remote URL in the last episode. Then we have the identity file, which is going to be pointing to the SSH key. This is the private key. Notice that there is no .pub at the end. Then we have the identities only, so it's only going to use this here. And then we're going to have the user, which is my user or username for my Bitbucket account, right? And so I'll go ahead and I'll quit out of this. Now what we want to do is we want to add a repo that's going to reference that host. So what we'll do is I'll just take this URL here, then I'll go ahead and I'll type in get remote add, and this will be sample, so that would be my sample as my remote repository. Oops, I accidentally hit the wrong command. But then I'll paste in this URL here, right? And then now I'll change bitbucket underscore DOCast to get blog, which is that host name that we created within our SSH config file. Then I'll click on enter. It's going to add that to my get remote repos. And we can see that we have that right here. Oh, sorry. Right here, get blog. And then what we'll do is now we can get push to the sample repo, and we can push to master. So that's basically the same thing. We're pushing to the same thing. And it's saying everything is up to date because, again, it's trying to push to that same repo that we pushed to earlier. So we didn't really make any changes, but it went ahead and pushed to that. Let's go ahead and just make a quick change just to see what that would look like. All right, so we'll go ahead and we'll open up the routes file, and I'll get rid of some of the commenting in there for the routes file, and that'll go ahead and it'll make some good changes for us. All right, so I took away all that comment code. I left only the necessary information here for resources and root, and I'll go ahead and I'll write to quit. then you'll notice that if I take a look at the status, we have changes to the route file. I'll go ahead and I'll git add all of that, and I'll git commit with a message to go ahead and I'll second commit here. I'll add that in, and then now I can go ahead and get push to the sample branch or the sample repo for master, and you see that it was able to make those changes or push those changes. Now if I go back into Bitbucket, I'll refresh the page, you should see another commit here known as second commit. Now that's a bad name for it, but that's going to work for now. So let's take a look at that configuration file once again. So less.ssh.config, and we'll take a look at this. So you can add as many as you would like here. Just keep on creating those SSH keys and referencing them here, and you should be good to go. So I hope this information helps. If you have any questions or comments, please leave them in the comments area below, and I look forward to seeing you in the next episode.